You are 16. The silk sheets beneath you are cold, though dozens of candles burn in the chamber, their smoke thick with the smell of melting wax and rosewater. The air is heavy, too heavy to breathe. Outside, wind rattles the palace shutters, but inside, nothing moves except the trembling of your hands. You were told this room was a place of honor, a place where queens are made and dynasties are secured. But the chains hidden beneath the velvet canopy whisper another truth. Tonight, you are not a bride, not even a woman, only a body, a secret, a silence that must never speak. Before the palace, there was a different world. You remember running barefoot through courtyards, dust rising in little golden clouds around your ankles, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens, the sound of mothers calling their daughters in from the evening air. Childhood was not rich, but it was filled with stories, stories whispered by older women, embroidered into lullabies and legends. They told you that queens lived like goddesses, that their beds were carved of ivory, their hands draped in jewels, their voices able to command armies. At night, by the light of a single flickering lamp, you would close your eyes and imagine yourself inside those walls, silk against your skin, music in the corridors, the world kneeling before your beauty. What they never told you was how much silence a palace demands. Your journey began with a veil, a piece of fabric so heavy with perfume, it made your eyes water. They placed it over your head, not as a crown, but as a curtain between who you were and who you would never be again. The cart that carried you rattled over stones. Every turn of the wheel carried you further from laughter, further from the girl you had been. When the gates of the palace rose before you, their ironwork sharp as spears, your heart pounded with a mixture of awe and dread. Candles lined the halls like watchful eyes. Perfume hung in the air too sweet, too suffocating, as though it meant to drown out the scent of fear. They said you were chosen. But chosen for what? To lie still beneath silks that were not yours. To breathe words you did not believe. To surrender the right to your own body, your own nights, your own name. Already you sensed the truth. The stories had been lies, and the palace bed was not a throne. It was a cage. The palace was not a home. It was a labyrinth. The first steps inside its halls felt like walking into another world, one built not for comfort, but for control. The marble floors were polished to a mirror's shine, so cold beneath your slippers that every step sent a shiver up your spine. Servants bowed without looking at your face, their silence rehearsed, their movements mechanical. No one spoke your name. You had already become a shadow in their eyes. Incense curled through the corridors, thick and heavy, as if the air itself carried secrets too dangerous to be spoken. Behind latticed windows, you caught glimpses of gardens, roses, fountains, the sound of caged birds, but the beauty was unreachable, always just beyond the bars of carved stone. They prepared you with rituals that felt more like punishments, bathing in water perfumed with crushed petals, your skin rubbed raw with oils until you smelled less like yourself and more like something manufactured. They brushed your hair until your scalp burned, braided it with gold threads that tugged painfully at your roots. Every gesture was ceremonial, yet it stripped you piece by piece of the girl who had once dreamed of freedom under an open sky. At nightfall, you were led to the chamber. The doors were carved from cedar, their scent sharp, almost medicinal. When they swung open, you saw the bed, draped in velvet and brocade, its canopy so heavy it seemed to sag under the weight of unseen burdens. Candles flickered in every corner, their flames restless, as though they too feared what was about to happen. Your heart pounded. Was this the honor they had promised? Was this the moment when you would ascend into legend, into power? But the air felt wrong, too still, too watchful. The silence pressed against your ears like cloth held over your mouth. Even before you lay down upon those silks, you understood this was no sanctuary. This was a stage, and you were not its queen. but its captive actress. The first night was the cruelest lesson. The chamber smelled of rosewater, but beneath it lingered another scent, something metallic, sharp, like rust or blood. The silk sheets that had seemed so luxurious in your dreams were now suffocating, clinging to your skin like damp leaves. Every fold whispered against you. Every candle flicker stretched your shadow across the walls until it looked like a stranger. You tried to steady your breath, to remind yourself of the stories. Queens crowned, in glory, brides adored, women transformed into legends. But the silence was louder than the tales. It swallowed your heartbeat, your voice, your very sense of self. Then came the presence, a figure entering the room, their footsteps soft but heavy with authority. You did not look up. You were not meant to. Your body stiffened, your hands cold, your mind spinning with questions you could never ask. Were you honored? Or were you prey? The canopy above seemed to sag lower, its shadows sinking toward you like chains. You felt the weight of every expectation pressing down. To obey, to remain still, to offer without refusal. And yet, in the secret chambers of your thoughts, another voice rose, thin, trembling, but alive. This is not what I was promised. This is not what I was meant to be. Outside, the wind howled against the shutters, rattling them like bones in a coffin. Inside, your silence was the only sound permitted. When the candles finally guttered low, you were left in darkness, heart racing, body rigid, a prisoner of the velvet cage. By dawn, nothing had been spoken, yet everything had changed. You were no longer the girl who dreamed of queenship. You were something else entirely, an ornament, a secret, a silence wrapped in silk. And though the sun rose beyond the palace walls, inside you felt only night. The first rule was never spoken, but you felt it in your bones. Silence is survival. Within the palace walls, a woman's voice was a dangerous weapon, too sharp, too revealing, too easily turned against her. So they taught you without words. Do not ask questions. Do not speak unless commanded. Do not scream no matter what happens behind the velvet curtains. Even the sound of your breath had to be measured. Delicate, as though inhaling too loudly might unravel the fragile illusion of obedience. Silence became your second skin. At night, the chamber was a stage, and you its silent actress. The figure who entered did not ask for your thoughts, your dreams, or your consent. Only your stillness. You learned to keep your eyes lowered, your lips closed, your body pliant, because to resist was to risk exile, disgrace, or worse. In the harem, women who defied the rule of silence were not remembered. Their names were erased, their bodies buried without ceremony, their stories smothered like flames in ash. But silence was not only demanded in the bedchamber. It followed you through the corridors, into the gardens, even into your prayers. Words, unspoken, hung in the air like ghosts. Questions you dared not voice, griefs you dared not confess, longings you dared not share. To speak them aloud would be to betray yourself, to hand your enemies a blade. And yet, silence did not mean peace. Inside your skull, thoughts thundered. Each unspoken word pressed against your chest like a stone. Each swallowed cry carved hollows in your spirit. You were alive, yes, but only in the way a locked chest is alive, full of treasures that can never be touched. In the palace, silence was both shield and shackle. It kept you alive, but it also kept you invisible. The second rule was harsher, more merciless than silence. Your body was no longer your own. In the palace, a woman's worth was measured not by her laughter, her wisdom, or her soul, but by the swelling of her belly. Fertility was the crown they placed upon your head, and barrenness the noose they tied around your neck. Every month became a trial, every cycle a judgment. Servants tracked your bleeding like scribes recording an omen. They whispered about your body as though it were a field, fertile or barren, useful or wasted, and when the time came to lie beneath the silks, you knew it was not desire that guided the night, but duty. You were not embraced, you were inspected, tested, weighed against the expectations of dynasty and bloodline. Pregnancy was celebrated, yes, but not as your triumph. It was his legacy, his proof of power, his lineage carved into your flesh. You became a vessel, praised not for who you were, but for what you could produce. And should your womb betray you, should the seed fail to take root, or the child fail to survive, the blame fell on your shoulders alone. Women who failed in this sacred duty were cast aside, stripped of their silks, sometimes even sent away in disgrace, their lives reduced to whispers of failure. Your body became a battlefield, torn between what you felt and what was demanded of you. Pain was dismissed, exhaustion ignored, longing forgotten. The palace wanted heirs, not women. And so, each breath, each night, each hidden tear was spent in the service of a future that was never truly yours. And deep inside, you began to wonder, was motherhood a blessing here, or another chain? One more way to keep you bound to the bed you could never escape. The third rule was the cruelest of all. Nothing that happened in the royal bed was ever meant to exist beyond its walls. Secrecy was the lifeblood of the palace. What you saw, what you endured, what you felt, it was all swallowed into silence, erased before it could become memory. The walls themselves seemed complicit, heavy tapestries muffling every sound, as though the palace had been built not to echo, but to bury. You learned quickly that there were no witnesses, only accomplices. Servants kept their eyes lowered, guards pretended not to hear, and even the women beside you in the harem spoke in riddles, their truths disguised in half-phrases and sighs. It was not loyalty that bound them, but fear. Fear that to tell the truth was to invite death. Secrets were enforced with precision. Letters intercepted, whispers punished, even dreams policed. You could not confide in a sister, nor trust a confidant, for any word could be turned into a weapon. If a child was born, the story was written not by the mother who carried the pain, but by scribes who bent ink to the ruler's will. If a woman disappeared, her absence was explained away with a single, convenient lie. The most dangerous secret of all, however, was the truth of your own heart. To admit you hated the bed, to confess you longed for freedom, to whisper that you were more than a vessel. Such thoughts, if overheard, could destroy you. And so you locked them inside, behind, the mask of obedience, where no one could reach them but you. Yet secrets have weight. They press down on the spirit, bending it, breaking it. You could feel them in your chest at night, like stones stacked one upon another, until breathing itself became labor. And in time, you began to realize that the palace did not need chains to hold you. It had built a prison out of silence, obedience, and secrecy, and taught you to guard it yourself. At first, you believed endurance was the only path, that if you bowed your head low enough, if you obeyed every rule, if you let silence hollow you out, you might survive untouched. But survival is not the same as living, and slowly, the difference began to burn inside you. It started as a whisper in your mind, soft but insistent. This is not all I am. You would feel it in the stillness after the chamber doors closed, in the ache of your body as you lay on silks that felt more like chains. It lingered when you caught sight of the gardens beyond the lattice, where roses bloomed freely while you withered in captivity. The rebellion was not loud, not yet. It was in the way you let your gaze linger too long on the horizon, the way your fingers traced patterns of freedom across the sheets when no one was watching. It was in the breath you held back during ceremonies, refusing to give the palace the satisfaction of your tears. But the awakening came with a price. Once you saw the prison, you could never unsee it. The bed was no longer a place of ritual. It was a battlefield, one where your body was claimed, but your soul resisted. Each night became a war between the version of you they demanded and the quiet, unseen version who still lived in the shadows of your heart. The palace noticed. They always noticed. Every hesitation, every delayed bow of the head, every moment your eyes lifted when they should have remained lowered. Whispers followed you like shadows. She is restless. She is ungrateful. She is dangerous. And perhaps you were. For in a world built on obedience, even a thought of rebellion is treason. The palace did not forgive disobedience, no matter how small. It began with whispers. Maids instructed to watch you more closely. Guards lingering longer outside your chamber door. Then came the punishments. Subtle at first, but sharp enough to leave marks invisible to the eye. Meals delayed until your stomach knotted in hunger. Candles taken away, so you sat in darkness, stripped of even the comfort of light. Days of silence enforced not by your choice, but by isolation. No servants to speak to, no companions, only walls that breathed your name back to you like mockery. And yet, in this isolation, something unexpected stirred. Alone in the darkness, you felt your thoughts take shape more clearly than ever. The silence no longer belonged to them. It belonged to you. You could hear your own heart beating, steady, defiant, alive. The harsher punishments came when your rebellion grew too visible. One night, after you refused to bow low enough during a ceremony, they dragged you to a side chamber, its floor damp with stone and shadow. The air was cold, heavy with mildew, and chains rattled faintly in the corners, reminders of what awaited women who forgot their place. Fear coiled in your stomach like a serpent. But even there, even with the threat of steel around your wrists, you clung to the single truth that they could not touch. I am still me. They cannot erase me. When they returned you to your bed, bruised but unbroken, you realized rebellion was not always escape. Sometimes rebellion was survival with your identity intact, a refusal to let their lies define the woman you had once dreamed of becoming. The palace had taken your freedom, your voice, even your body, but they had not taken the spark within you. And though it flickered in the shadows, small and fragile, it remained a flame, one they feared more than anything. The palace did not forgive disobedience, no matter how small. It began with whispers. Maids instructed to watch you more closely. Guards lingering longer outside your chamber door. Then came the punishments, subtle at first, but sharp enough to leave marks invisible to the eye. Meals delayed until your stomach knotted in hunger. Candles taken away, so you sat in darkness, stripped of even the comfort of light. Days of silence enforced not by your choice, but by isolation. No servants to speak to, no companions, only walls that breathed your name back to you like mockery. And yet, in this isolation, something unexpected stirred. Alone in the darkness, you felt your thoughts take shape more clearly than ever. The silence no longer belonged to them. It belonged to you. You could hear your own heart beating, steady, defiant, alive. The harsher punishments came when your rebellion grew too visible. One night, after you refused to bow low enough during a ceremony, they dragged you to a side chamber, its floor damp with stone and shadow. The air was cold, heavy with mildew, and chains rattled faintly in the corners, reminders of what awaited women who forgot their place. Fear coiled in your stomach like a serpent. But even there, even with the threat of steel around your wrists, you clung to the single truth that they could not touch. I am still me. They cannot erase me. When they returned you to your bed, bruised but unbroken, you realized rebellion was not always escape. Sometimes rebellion was survival with your identity intact, a refusal to let their lies define the woman you had once dreamed of becoming. The palace had taken your freedom, your voice, even your body, but they had not taken the spark within you. And though it flickered in the shadows, small and fragile, it remained a flame, one they feared more than anything. Time moved differently inside the palace. Seasons passed, Wars raged beyond the walls. Rulers rose and fell. But for you, each day was marked only by the same velvet canopy, the same suffocating silence, the same rituals of the bed. Years softened the sharp edges of your defiance, not because you surrendered, but because exhaustion wrapped itself around your spirit like a shroud. You learned to conserve your fire, to let the rebellion burn quietly, rather than blaze into the open where it would be crushed. Survival became an art, a balancing act between obedience and identity. Your body bore the marks of time, the ache of pregnancies, the weight of loss, the scars that were not visible but felt with every breath. You had fulfilled the rule of fertility, given the palace its heirs, and in doing so, surrendered pieces of yourself that could never be reclaimed. Each child was a part of you, yet never fully yours, raised not by your hands, but by tutors, guards, and laws that kept even motherhood bound in chains. At night, lying awake beneath the canopy, you wondered what had become of the girl who once dreamed of queenship. Was she dead, buried beneath silks and silence? Or had she only grown quieter, waiting still for freedom that might never come? Outside your chamber, whispers carried of younger women arriving, girls wide-eyed and trembling, their bodies draped in gold and perfume. You recognized their faces, for they mirrored your own years ago. You wanted to warn them, to tell them the truth. But your voice had long been swallowed by the rule of secrecy. And so you watched in silence, their futures unfolding along the same path, the same rituals, the same forbidden bed. The palace endured, and so did you. But endurance was not victory, it was only survival. In the palace, no woman's story belonged to herself. Even your life, your pain, your endurance was rewritten to serve the throne. To the outside world, you were painted as an emblem of loyalty, a faithful consort who obeyed every command, without question. The scribes polished your memory into legend, chiseling away every trace of fear, every bruise, every tear, until what remained was a flawless mask. They wrote songs of your devotion, etched prayers of your obedience, as if silence had been your choice and not your cage. Within the palace walls, your name was spoken as a warning. Servants whispered of the night you were punished for lifting your eyes, or the day your defiance brought you chains. These stories were retold not to honor your strength, but to frighten younger women into compliance. Do not be like her, they were told. Do not question. Do not resist. And yet, some heard a different meaning. The youngest among them, the ones still raw with innocence, listened closely to those whispers and found in them a hidden kind of courage. They saw in your endurance not just obedience, but survival. They learned that even in the depths of silence, a woman could carry a spark the palace could never extinguish. Your story became both cage and torch, used by the rulers to enforce obedience, yet secretly carried by others as a reminder that rebellion, however small, was possible. You were both their warning and their hope. And perhaps this was the cruelest legacy of all, that your life was never yours alone. It was a mirror held up to others, a tale told and retold until the truth was blurred beyond recognition. What remained was not the woman you had been, but the myth the palace needed you to be. The room where your story ended still breathes in silence. Candles gutter in the corners, their wax dripping slowly, as if measuring time in molten tears. The chains, long since removed, left faint grooves on the stone floor, marks that no servant, scrubbing could erase. The silk canopy above the bed hangs limp now, heavy with dust, its once vivid threads dulled into shadows of gold and crimson. This was the same chamber where the flute once wept through the lattice, where rosewater had perfumed the air, where you were dressed like a bride. But now the air holds nothing but the weight of absence. The silence is thick, not peaceful but suffocating, as though the walls themselves mourn a secret they cannot tell. To those who pass outside, the chamber appears no different from any other. a closed door, a muted space, another corner of the endless palace. Yet, for those who once crossed its threshold, the memory lingers. They say that when the candles are lit, their flames lean toward the bed, trembling as though afraid. They say that when the wind moves through the window lattice, it carries not music, but a sigh. Here, every object holds the echo of your endurance. The bed is no longer a place of sleep, but a monument to silence. The chains, though gone, rattle faintly in memory. The silk veil, still folded in a chest, smells faintly of rosewater and fear. In the end, you became a presence not easily dismissed, not entirely forgotten, not entirely remembered. A shadow in the palace corridors, a warning wrapped in silk, a ghost that lingers where the walls still breathe. And when the last candle in the chamber burns down to its wick, darkness does not fall. Instead, the room glows faintly, as if your silence, unyielding, unbroken, still waits within. History rarely remembers the ones who suffered behind closed doors. Kings, sultans, and dynasties fill the chronicles, their victories and conquests etched into stone. But the women, veiled, silenced, confined, exist only in whispers. Their lives reduced to symbols, their endurance buried beneath silk and secrecy. Your story, one of countless others, remains trapped between memory and forgetting. The palace that witnessed your torment still stands, though its stones have lost their voice. The silken veils, the perfumed baths, the chamber with its heavy canopy, these linger only as shadows, fragments of a truth no one dared to write. Yet, silence itself can become a form of resistance. In the absence of your words, the walls remember. In the absence of your face, the chains and candles and veils become your testimony. You endure not in songs or scrolls, but in the uneasy quiet that follows your name. Perhaps this is the cruelest legacy of all, to exist not as a heroine, not as a martyr, but as a haunting, a reminder that beauty, power, and ceremony often conceal something darker, that behind every glittering court there may lie a chamber where silence is forced, where suffering is hidden, where breath itself becomes defiance. And so, as the last candle fades, your story does not end. It lingers in the hush of empty corridors, in the tremor of a flame, in the faint trace of rosewater on silk. A voice without sound, a presence without body, a silence too heavy to forget.